In this video, we're ranking every linebacker in the 2024 draft class. Definitely the weakest position group in this class, which I recognize is not the best thing to say at the start of the video for retention, but there's a lot of teams in the NFL that need linebacker, so they're kind of stuck with this group, and there still are some late round gems that are fun players. Starting at the bottom, we've got Jackson Mitchell out of UConn, who's actually the lowest graded player that I've watched in this entire class. He's undersized, not a very good athlete, misses a lot of tackles, gets stuck to blocks in the run game, and he gets picked on in coverage. My 24th ranked linebacker is Aaron Beasley, also with an undrafted free agent grade. Actually a decent college player, but he's just too small to hold up through contact and not a very good athlete either. We got Omar Spates out of LSU at linebacker 23 with a priority free agent grade. Another sub 230 pound linebacker that struggles to shed blocks. Looking at my undrafted free agents, they're actually all under 230 pounds, so common theme there. But yeah, Spates is another limited athlete, not as bad as the other two. He played his first 4 years at Oregon State, very experienced player, but don't see him being more than a practice squad type of player. I've got Kalen DeLoach out of Florida State at linebacker 22. He had by far the best tape of anyone that we've discussed so far. He actually made a good amount of plays in the backfield, had a lot of pass rushing production. I just don't know exactly what you can do with a 5'11", 210 pound linebacker. You might say move him to safety. I don't think he has the athletic traits for that position, and his biggest issue on tape was losing track of his coverage responsibilities. Even as a sub linebacker, I don't really think he excels at what you're bringing him on the field to do. And then my final priority free agent is Steele Chambers out of Ohio State at linebacker 21. He's a smart run defending linebacker. He's almost always in the right spot. He isn't afraid of contact. When he's able to wrap up, he's a decent tackler, but he has very short arms, and you see that lack of length when he's trying to separate from blocks, and he's really stiff breaking down an open space. He got juked out of his cleats by Talia Tagovailoa. Anytime he has to come to a stop and redirect his pursuit angle, it's a major struggle. So he's an undersized player. You'd think he'd be a solid sub-package cover linebacker. I don't really trust him in that area either. He doesn't really have the short area quickness for man coverage on linebackers. His anticipation and route squeeze and zone coverage I thought was lacking, and then when he gets to the catch point, again, he just doesn't really have the length to disrupt and break the ball out. Onto the draftable grades, we've got Nathaniel Watson out of Mississippi State coming in at linebacker 20. He was one of the most productive pass rushing linebackers in this class, 35 pressures and 10 sacks this past season. And a lot of times with linebackers, pass rushing production is just unblocked, kind of inflated stats, but Nathaniel Watson actually has a pass rushing skill set to get around blocks from offensive linemen. He's got decent length, he's quick with his hands, he does a good job sliding through gaps, and he's very controlled in pursuit of the quarterback, so he can convert a lot of his pressures into sacks. And he's one of the better tackling linebackers in this class. Again, his length really helps him in that area, 5.4% missed tackle rate last season. But outside of that, I don't think Nathaniel Watson brings a whole lot to the table. He has okay straight line speed, but overall a very limited athlete, not someone that's going to make up ground and chase down situations, and you really see the lack of lateral fluidity when he has to change directions and recover from bad tackling angles. He had a good amount of plays on tape that didn't register as a missed tackle because he didn't even make contact. And for someone with his length and pass rushing skill set, he was extremely passive engaging with blocks. Rarely will you see him forcefully strike a block. He gets caught up in traffic at the second level way too often. He's very indecisive reading things out in the run game. I actually saw him second guess himself multiple times on tape. He would initially be flowing with the run. There'd be some like fly motion in the opposite direction, and after he had taken 4 to 5 steps to the play side, his eyes would get locked on that motion and he'd actually backtrack into a block. He had a very limited coverage role at Mississippi State and doesn't really have the fluidity, I think, to project as much in that area. At linebacker 19, I've got Curtis Jacobs out of Penn State. He's 6'1", 236 pounds with good straight line speed. So he's another player that's undersized, but I don't really think has the coverage skill set to project in a third down role like you might expect. He was very inconsistent at keeping up with vertical coverage assignments. He would constantly let tight ends leak behind him uncovered. In zone coverage, he isn't particularly instinctive or quick to react, and he suffers from a lot of the same issues that undersized linebackers do in run defense. He's got short arms and struggles to shed blocks at the second level. That's made worse by slow play recognition. He gives blockers time to climb to the second level, doesn't get an early read on the play to beat them to their spot. You do see flashes of some block shedding potential, especially when he's walked up at the line of scrimmage and he's in attack mode. He's got the upper body twitch to avoid blocks and create a moving target, and he actually has really big hands, and you kind of see that with his ability to stab the blocker's frame. When he's lined up right over a tight end and he knows that he's going to be stacking and shedding, he actually has a decent success rate there. But overall, I don't see much more than a special teams player. He did punt coverage for Penn State, so he could offer some value there. At linebacker 18, I've got Michael Barrett out of Michigan. Very fun player to watch. He's undersized and not a great athlete, so that is going to limit his grade, but he actually offers something in terms of a third down skill set. He processes route concepts and identifies his assignment quickly. He takes really good angles to the flat, whether it's a screen pass or just his coverage assignment. Very secure tackler in coverage. He's able to read the quarterback and anticipate routes that are developing behind him, get his hand into passing windows, and then he was a very efficient and impactful pass rusher. He only had 19 pressures and 3 sacks, but he had 3 forced fumbles on the year. 2 of those came as a pass rusher, and he showed really good timing and contact balance to fight through the blitz pickup and close in on the quarterback. I think as a third down linebacker that can cover and get after the quarterback, Michael Barrett offers some value. He also has 634 career special team snaps spread out across 5 phases, but his main issues show up in the run game. He just struggles to clear himself from blocks at the second level. There were flashes on tape of some decent block shedding, and he has long arms, but overall his anticipation and ability to keep his frame clean, I would say, is below average. Doesn't have great speed to chase ball carriers to the sideline, and you also see this when he's shuffling laterally. He isn't able to keep his pads square to the line of scrimmage. He has to open up his hips to keep pace with the run. So I think the value that he can bring on early downs is pretty limited. At linebacker 17, I've got Tatum Bethune out of Florida State. Another really fun player where it's just hard to reject a 3-down role. He's one of the better cover linebackers in this class. He patrols the flat, completely shuts down screen passes to his side. He's able to run with seam routes, whether it's man coverage or Tampa 2, but then 15 to 20 yards downfield, he can turn around and locate the ball. They kept trying to get him on play action, leak concepts. He's so assignment secure. Even if he bites initially, he's quick and urgent to recover depth. His one issue in coverage is that he's not great in zone coverage with his eyes on the quarterback. You can just run a drag route behind Tatum Bethune and he's not really going to react to it. So that's the main thing that's limiting him from being a complete cover linebacker. And then he has kind of a weird profile in run defense. So he's another undersized linebacker, 5'11 and a half, 229 pounds, but he has long arms and he's extremely aggressive, striking blockers, separating himself from blocks. Florida State let him play downhill a lot, which definitely helps because it encourages him to be proactive, engaging with the block, but he actually has real block shedding skills and a pretty high success rate in stack and shed situations. But he has a very thin lower half. You can just see on tape how skinny his legs are, and that combined with some inconsistent footwork ends up putting him on the ground pretty frequently. If he isn't able to disengage from the block early and it just turns into a stalemate, he's getting moved backwards and usually put on his back. I don't think he has the best play recognition in run defense. There's some false steps and late diagnosis, and then average to below average sideline range. I felt like he had decent short area burst, definitely better than his vertical and broad jump would indicate, but when it comes to chasing ball carriers to the sideline, you'll see him lose ground pretty frequently. Next up, we've got Tyron Hopper out of Missouri, very productive player. He has good instincts as a run defender that allows him to be proactive engaging with blocks, and as a slightly undersized player with short arms, he does a good job of attacking half the man and kind of contorting his body to evade contact while he's stacking and shedding. But if he gets centered to a block, again, he doesn't really have the play strength to hold his ground. He's been a pretty unreliable tackler for most of his career. He had his highest missed tackle rate this past season. For a player with short arms and average athletic traits, he's going to be in a lot of compromising full extension tackle situations, and that's just going to lead to a lot of misses and a lot of slipping off of tackles. He also doesn't really have the stopping power as a tackler to stand the ball carrier up in short yardage or goal line situations. I noticed that a few times. He played a very advanced coverage role at Missouri, which you can't say for a lot of linebackers coming out of college. They had him in traditional zone drops, they had him in man coverage situations, they had him running the pull in Tampa 2. He's very smart in zone coverage, especially with stuff developing in front of him. He's quick to break on underneath routes, but when he has to turn and run vertically, you really see the limitations with his speed. There's multiple times on tape where he was having to grab at the jersey with a seam route. A few times he got called for a penalty, a few times he just allowed separation. I think Hopper's most likely just a good college linebacker that doesn't really really have a trump card trait to succeed in the NFL, but his experience and well-rounded skill set I think is worth betting on mid day 3. My 15th ranked linebacker is Tyrese Knight out of UTEP, and he was a disappointing player for me because the flashes that he showed on tape were really impressive. He has good size, long arms, decent straight line speed. He can flow with perimeter runs. He's got decent lateral quickness to slide and mirror cutbacks, but the block shedding and play recognition with Tyrese Knight is some of the worst in this class. He's easily manipulated out of his fit by misdirection. Even at his level of competition, he is frequently the last player on defense to recognize the play. UTEP's defense will be swarming in on the ball carrier, and he's facing the opposite direction, chasing some kind of eye candy. When I first turned on the tape, I expected a player with his frame and his length to be a good stack and shed linebacker, but he's extremely passive engaging with blocks. He's got a flimsy punch into initial contact, doesn't establish any separation, and he isn't even a tall player, but he plays so upright that he gets put on his back pretty often. I thought he had decent coverage instincts. He did a good job of using his length to reach into passing windows. His main issue in coverage is being late to recover from play action. If he bites on a play fake, he'll recover like 2 yards of depth and then just stare at the quarterback while everything's developing behind him. He did have 5 forced fumbles, and he's a pretty solid tackler. I think there are some developmental traits there, but I wouldn't really be comfortable with him playing year 1. And he's already a very experienced player, over 2,700 career snaps, so I'm not sure how much more room for development there is. My 14th ranked linebacker is J.D. Bertrand out of Notre Dame. We didn't get any athletic testing for him. He's got an extensive injury history. I think he's injured right now, but he's pretty undersized with extremely short arms, 6th percentile arm length. I think his first step is solid, but the straight line speed is average to below average, and at his size, if he isn't first to engage with the block, he can just get deleted from the play. The first game I watched, one of the first plays, he just got launched, and I was thinking this is going to be a UDFA type of player. The rest of his tape got a lot better. You didn't see him get knocked down nearly as often. He's a downhill player that just blasts into contact and completely disrupts the spacing or tempo of the play, whether it's blowing up a puller, barreling over a running back in pass protection, or just denting his side of the line of scrimmage. He's the definition of a disruptor. He does a good job of using his lack of height to his advantage and leveraging underneath blocks, forcing his way into gaps. But again, he doesn't have great speed to keep up with stretch runs or anything to the outside. He makes up for some of that with, I would say, above average play recognition. And watching him at the Senior Bowl, linebacker is a tough position to evaluate in Mobile, but he was by far the most communicative linebacker on the field. So I think that definitely speaks to his awareness, and he was a 2-time team captain, I believe. In coverage, he does a good job reading the quarterback's eyes and diagnosing what's in front of him. I thought he had a poor sense of routes that were developing behind him in zone coverage, which is a key trait that I look for with linebackers. He's a very physical rerouter in zone coverage. When somebody comes into his zone, he takes that personally and just shucks them out of the play. And then he was also an efficient blitzer, 29% pressure rate this past season, 30 pressures, 4 sacks on 104 pass rushing snaps. Like I said, he doesn't have the elite speed, but he's got some decent explosiveness, and he can really build up momentum quickly and just power through pass protection. So I think J.D. Bertrand is a 3rd or 4th linebacker type that can contribute on special teams. If he's able to really have that elite play recognition in the NFL, he could definitely find a starting role. We've seen limited athletes do that before, but I can't go earlier than a 6th round grade. My 13th linebacker is Tommy Eichenberg out of Ohio State, a player that I am very surprised to see so many people high on. He's a consensus top 150 player. A lot of people have him in their top 100. Dane Brugler has him as linebacker 5 with a 3rd to 4th round grade, so it wouldn't surprise me if he went late day 2, early day 3. He's got decent size, 6'2", 233 pounds. He does have short arms. By the way, these percentiles are based on a data set that goes back to 1999. I think for next year, there's going to be specific positions where I limit the scope of the data, and linebacker weight is going to be one of those because pretty much everyone nowadays is sub 240, so the percentiles are kind of misleading. But he did all of his testing at Ohio State's Pro Day except for the 40-yard dash, and I think a lot of times the drills that a player doesn't do are just as telling as the ones that they do. It's like when you have a 6'3" corner that does everything everything except the 3-cone. But you do see with Tommy Eichenberg just a lack of speed, a lack of short area burst, can't really chase down runs to the outside or extend his tackling range. If he's got someone cutting back 2 yards away for him, he doesn't have that burst to close in on them and wrap up. For the most part, he does a good job of being proactive, engaging with blocks, and making sure that he's establishing first contact. That helps him minimize some of his length disadvantage. But when he does get into a more reactive situation where he's late to stack and shed, he doesn't really have the ability to absorb contact and stay on his feet through traffic. He's definitely a sound linebacker in terms of gap integrity, but he isn't particularly quick or instinctive or reactive defending the run. He's very measured with his initial steps. You rarely see him working ahead of blocks, and that really limits his ability to make plays in the backfield. And then in coverage, he had a couple nice plays. I think his best trait is his urgency, squeezing routes in adjacent zones. So if he's in the middle hook and he's got a quick slant developing in his peripheral like 7 to 8 yards away, he's really quick to break on that and meet it at the top of the route. But I don't really think he has man coverage traits. He bites hard on play action and doesn't do much to recover, leaves open voids over the middle of the field. And then another player that doesn't have a great sense for routes that are developing behind them in zone coverage. So yeah, I really don't see it with Tommy Eichenberg. I went through all the Ohio State tape, which I do for most big schools, and to me, he was an average to above average college linebacker. I don't really think he has the traits to project much improvement when he gets to the NFL. And then my final 6th round grade is Darius Muasau out of UCLA. He measured in at just under 6 foot, 225 pounds. He was listed at 230, but watching him on tape, he looks so much thicker than that. He has outstanding contact balance, does a great job staying on his feet in the middle of traffic, playing through blocks. If you would have just showed me his tape and had me guess his weight, I would have said like 240 just based on his play strength and the way that he looks. He's got a stiff 2-hand punch. When he's playing downhill, he can stack and shed offensive linemen. There are times that he'll get pinned to blocks on the backside of the play, and that's where you see his lack of length kind of show up. But overall, I think his ability to shed and work through blocks is definitely a plus. He's efficient reading his keys and reacting to blocking schemes. He's able to trigger just a half step behind the offense and stay ahead of blocks. And it makes sense because he's one of the most experienced players in this class, 3,640 career snaps, but he's really just a below average athlete, doesn't have great sideline range. That could be another reason that I think he's heavier than he is, just because of his movement skills. When he's in a foot race to the edge, he consistently loses ground. He really struggles to change directions and reset his pursuit angle. He wasn't put in a whole lot of compromising coverage situations, but I would be hesitant to ask him to play man coverage in the NFL. And when he's thumping downhill within the box, he's a secure tackler, but out in open space, he doesn't have the fluidity or length to be a great tackler. So I think Mueso is just a solid early down linebacker prospect. I don't really see elite upside, but he's someone that's at least going to be in the right position if he's forced to play. My 11th ranked linebacker is James Williams out of Miami. He's a former 5-star recruit, actually top 5 in the 2021 recruiting class, and he played safety at Miami, but I think it's almost a certainty that he's going to move to linebacker in the NFL. I normally try to be pretty chalk or conservative with these positional changes, but it would be hard for me to see any NFL team having him as a safety on their board. He's 6'4", 231 pounds with almost 34-inch arms, and heading into his tape, I was expecting this freak athlete based on his recruiting pedigree, but even for a linebacker, he's a pretty average athlete. A lot of my analysis of him is as a safety because that's what he played in college. I think his coverage instincts are poor to below average for a safety, but average to above average for a linebacker. He's got the length to reach into passing lanes and disrupt at the catch point. His route recognition and coverage discipline when it comes to like play action and trick plays was pretty underwhelming. He had some press man reps and he actually looked pretty comfortable disrupting at the line of scrimmage, but he just doesn't have the recovery speed to keep up with even college tight ends. And he had one press man rep against Boston College where he was able to get a pass breakup by basically falling on the receiver, but he gave up a touchdown in the red zone to Clemson, and there were a couple other plays where he got stacked, but he wasn't targeted. And like I said, he just doesn't have the range to play safety in the NFL. His speed is even average for a linebacker, but he is an absolutely punishing tackler. He flattens people over the middle of the field. There was a sequence against Texas A&M where he laid a huge hit on Evan Stewart, the receiver, and then the very next play, they targeted him on a hole shot, and James Williams again was crashing down from the deep half, and Evan Williams had a focus drop because he was so scared of getting hit. But James Williams is going to lose half of his paycheck to taxes and the other half to unnecessary roughness and late hit penalties. He's had 9 personal fouls over his college career. He definitely plays through the whistle. Normally you like to see that aggressive play style, but I think with James Williams it's definitely a negative. I think his biggest issue projecting to linebacker is his change of direction skills as a tackler. He stops his feet and leans into tackle attempts, and there's just a lot of bad misses where you can really see the stiffness in open space. They played him a good amount in the box, not even as a box safety, but just legitimately as a linebacker, and he actually is a capable block shedder. There will definitely be stuff to iron out technically, but I think he's at a good starting point as a stack and shed linebacker. So he's a boom bust prospect. I could see him even going later than this, but I do think he offers some intriguing upside as a matchup weapon. Into the top 10, we've got Maurice Liufau out of Notre Dame, 6'2", 234 with over 34-inch arms. His arm length is 97th percentile for linebackers, and he uses all of that length when it comes to shedding blocks. He's got a stiff punch, heavy hands at the point of attack, does a great job of separating from blocks, especially when he's crashing downhill and the block is developing in his field of vision. He uses a swim move to work through climbing blocks at the second level, and then they used him as a pass rusher a lot, lining up on the edge, and he actually showed some pretty advanced hand technique. His instincts and play recognition as a run defender have to improve though. Poor gap discipline. As great as he is stacking and shedding at the point of attack, he doesn't do a great job of anticipating blocks, so there's a lot of times that he just gets blindsided by contact and stuck to the backside of the play. He's easily manipulated by running backs. He'll get influenced out of his gap when running backs press the line of scrimmage. He'll sacrifice cutback lanes, and then he's nowhere near as reliable of a wrap-up tackler as you want to see for a player with his length. He's high cut with very rigid change of direction, so that gives him problems in open space. He's also just undisciplined as far as leaving his feet and tackling high, and his pursuit range going sideline to sideline was just average. But he's a very skilled cover linebacker. He just effortlessly gets depth in his zone drops. He can cover so much ground quickly to take away like a whole shot on 3rd and 15. Even though I thought his speed was average in the run game, he had no issues carrying vertical routes down the sideline. In zone coverage, he's decisive and assignment secure. So a lot of times with more project linebackers, coverage is the area that they need the most improvement. With Liufau, it's play recognition in the run game, and if he can improve that, I mean, he's such a high effort player. I think he does have some real upside as a 3-down linebacker, but with his lack of reliability as a tackler, he's just not someone I would want in the field early in their career. My 9th ranked linebacker is Jalen Ford out of Texas. He's an experienced player, over 2,000 career snaps, 2 seasons as a full-time starter. He has really good size, 6'2", 240 pounds, which is 63rd percentile for linebackers historically, but nowadays it might as well be 95th percentile. Even though he doesn't have the longest arms, he's an effective block shedder with heavy hands. He can blow up pullers, compress gaps, and power and counter. He's a physical tackler with really good stopping power. His biggest issues in the run game are just fluidity and agility to mirror jump cuts in the open field, and then he's a good block shedder when he's anticipating blocks, but there are times that he'll get blindsided and not recognize climbing blockers. Overall though, I really like what Jalen Ford can add as an early down run defending linebacker. His biggest issues are in pass coverage. He's an average to below average athlete, doesn't have great top speed. I don't really see him as a player with much man coverage potential. He made a couple plays reaching into passing windows, but overall his route recognition and coverage awareness were not very good. He gets picked on in the RPO game. He's very susceptible to leak routes and delayed releases. If he's responsible for a tight end in man coverage and he isn't releasing right off the snap, he loses track of him. He had a ton of issues covering mesh routes. He would just stick to that first drag route and leave the second one wide open. I really like what Jalen Ford can give you as a run defender. I just think his upside as a 3-down player is so limited because of his weaknesses in coverage. My 8th ranked linebacker is Jordan McGee out of Temple. He's undersized, kind of built like a big safety, but he's extremely athletic. Most of his pro day drills were above the 75th percentile. He's an excellent cover linebacker. He actually played a lot of snaps in the slot, where he had legitimate deep coverage responsibilities. He's extremely alert and assignment secure in zone coverage. He doesn't just hover over a patch of grass. He's proactive, locating his assignment, connecting to routes. If he bites on play action, he's quick to recover depth and find work. I think Jordan Magee's upside is one of the better cover linebackers in the NFL. His size will probably limit his effectiveness in the run game, but he actually adds a lot of value in that phase. He has a really quick trigger, especially against gap scheme runs. He has just immediate recognition of pulling blockers. He's so quick to beat them to their spot and funnel everything back inside. Despite being undersized, he actually has decent length to play off of blocks, and he's active and aggressive with his hands. Like I've said with most of these undersized linebackers, if he isn't first to engage, he can get washed out of the play, but he has pretty good contact balance to at least keep his footing. He may get driven out of a gap, but there aren't that many pancakes on his tape. I think his biggest weakness and the main thing limiting his grade is just being an inconsistent tackler. He actually has good wrap-up technique, but he slips off of way too many tackles. I mentioned his play recognition against gap scheme runs. I felt like against wide zone, there would be times that he was late to trigger and he'd get trapped on the backside. But outside of that, I think Jordan Magee is a very underrated prospect, and he's one of the few day 3 linebackers I would really be targeting in this class. My 7th ranked linebacker is Jeremiah Trotter Jr. out of Clemson. He's 6 foot, 228 pounds with short arms, and for his size, I think he has average to below average speed. He didn't run the 40, which again should raise some alarm bells. There are too many times where you'll see Jeremiah Trotter lose the edge in pursuit. I think in both phases, he's a very smart and instinctive player. Despite his lack of size, he's actually got a lot of tools to avoid and shed blocks. He's got a rip and a swim to get around blocks. I just think in the NFL, he's going to have some real difficulties stacking and shedding. In coverage, he does a great job anticipating screens. I thought he showed some really good instincts in zone coverage as like a hook defender, breaking on a sit route, reacting to the quick game. There were times that he would flash the ability to have eyes on the quarterback and still mirror a route that was developing behind him. I thought his worst coverage performance was against Syracuse. He had multiple coverage busts in that game, but overall his coverage tape was pretty solid. And he wasn't a terrible tackler, not great. I mean, he had a 16.3% missed tackle rate this past season, but the majority of his tackles were shoestring tackles. There were very few just wrap up form tackles on his tape. That's another thing that's pretty concerning for me with Jeremiah Trotter Jr. He's rated a lot higher than this by most people. There's some boards that have him as a 2nd round pick. I just don't really see the athletic upside, and I don't think he's an instinctive or technically sound enough player to offset that. My LB6 is Trevin Wallace out of Kentucky, and he is a pure athletic project, kind of the opposite of Jeremiah Trotter Jr. in a way. He has good size and length, ran a 4.51 in the 40-yard dash, 127-inch broad jump, which is 89th percentile. For today's NFL, he has prototypical size, length, and speed, and when he puts everything together like 5 times per game, he looks like an NFL starter. He has no issue chasing down outside runs. He can scrape laterally with square paths to the line of scrimmage and keep pace with the ball carrier. He can run vertically with seam routes. He's got the contact balance to absorb blocks, and he's a hard hitter with good stopping power as a tackler, but at this point, he's purely relying on athleticism over play recognition. He's slow to process rushing concepts. That gets him stuck on the backside of the play. It also inhibits his block anticipation, so even though he has the length and the heavy hands to theoretically stack and shed, he's rarely early engaging with the block and initiating contact. He overreacts to fakes and motions, and then I think he's got a lot to work on in coverage as well. He's lacking the zone coverage instincts that you look for, and then really his one athletic limitation is he's not very fluid in man coverage. So with Trevin Wallace, the question is really just how willing are you to bet on the upside and the athletic traits? I don't think he's going to be very good day 1, but he could be the type of player that year 3, year 4, he emerges as a top 10 linebacker. My 5th ranked linebacker is Edifuan Ulofoshio. I think along with Jordan Magee, he's probably the most underrated linebacker in this class. I've got him at 115 on my board, which is as high as anyone on the internet. He's a turbocharged linear athlete, 6 foot, 236 pounds, long arms. He had a 94th percentile 10-yard split, 81st percentile 40-yard dash. Vertical and broad jump were above 90th percentile. He is urgent and explosive moving in a straight line, but very stiff changing directions. He does a great job using his length to stack and shed blocks. For as stiff as he is moving laterally, he actually has some bounce to avoid blocks at the second level. He runs through contact, lays huge hits, and he showed flashes of really quick play diagnosis, but overall there were too many false steps early in the play that would put him behind the action and on the backside of blocks. He's not the most reliable fitting his gaps. He'll leave some open cutback lanes, but with his effort and motor, I think he can be a high impact run defender as he shores up his play recognition and gap integrity. I think he has potential as a cover linebacker. He flashes some high level playmaking instincts and reactive athleticism. Probably the best play on his tape was a pass breakup against Roman Wilson in the national championship game. On 4th and 3, they ran a speed out. He dived in front of the ball. Overall, he is a little bit slow to react in zone coverage, and even though he has the straight line speed, there is a slight stall when he's turning and accelerating with a vertical route. So he's my 5th linebacker. It still is just a mid 4th round grade, but I think he's very underrated in an underwhelming linebacker class. And then at LB4, I've got Cedric Gray out of UNC. He's 6'1", 234 pounds, good arm length, just 21 years old. He ran a 4.64 in the 40-yard dash, which is fine, but I actually thought he had really good speed and closing bursts. He was consistently able to beat running backs to the corner. Take a shot because this is another linebacker that has the length and hand usage to stack and shed from blocks if he's striking early, but if he isn't establishing first contact, he will get driven out of his gap and finishes way too many plays on the ground. That's by far my biggest issue with Cedric Gray, is he just ends up on the ground too often. Doesn't really have the contact balance or play strength to fight through blocks if they land their hands first. He's one of the few linebackers in this class that can actually sink his hips and change directions to reset his pursuit angle. Very common theme with this class is if you're in open space with a shifty ball carrier, they just can't really keep up. Cedric Gray, despite really poor numbers in the short shuttle and 3-cone, actually I think has some fluid change of direction skills as a tackler. A lot of his missed tackles came when he was backdooring a block on like wide zone, and so he had to take a more difficult angle to the tackle and he'd miss an attempt at their legs. I think as a wrap-up tackler though, he was pretty solid. Where Cedric Gray really thrives though is in coverage. He has a complete coverage skill set. He can play any role on 3rd down. He's very decisive, sifting through route concepts, quick to connect to his assignment in zone coverage. He can mirror tight ends and running backs in man coverage. At the catch point, he's able to have his back to the quarterback, face guarding the target, and then read their body language and rake through the hands. And then he's the best linebacker in this class at recovering from play action. He's had multiple pass breakups over his career where he initially bid on play action and then he was quick to recover depth and force an incompletion. The one consistent issue I noticed with him in coverage is when he had eyes on the quarterback, he would lose track of routes in his peripheral vision. So if something leaked out to the flat, he would be late to squeeze that and he'd give up like an 8-yard completion. But outside of that, I don't think I trust another linebacker more in coverage than Cedric Gray. I only have 3 linebackers in my top 100, and my 3rd ranked linebacker is going to be Junior Colson. He's been a starter for Michigan since he was a freshman. I remember watching Michigan tape back in the Aiden Hutchinson class, and Junior Colson legitimately stood out as a freshman. And I'm definitely lower on Junior Colson than the consensus. He's 58th on the consensus board. I've got him at 80 overall, but I really don't have a lot of issues with his game. He's a complete player. I just think he's a limited athlete. He's an extremely secure tackler, 4.7% missed tackle rate. If you're below 5% as a linebacker, that is A+. He has quick play recognition. He's got the size to stack and shed blocks, rarely ends up on the ground, and is usually able to strike and separate from blocks. As a run defender, Junior Colson really has everything that you look for outside of that elite pursuit range to track down outside runs. In coverage, I think his skill set is a little bit more limited. He is very alert and instinctive defending screen passes, and he's a reliable tackler in coverage as well, so if it's just limiting a check down to a 2-yard gain, he can take care of that. But he's not a player you want taking deep zone drops or having to play man coverage on athletic tight ends or running backs. You'll see him lose pace with shallow crossers and zone coverage. He gave up a touchdown to Marvin Harrison Jr. on one of those. He's smart and technically sound enough to, I think, be a high quality starter in the NFL, similar to someone like Nick Bolton. I just worry about some of the athletic limitations, and that's why I have him at linebacker 3. My 2nd ranked linebacker is Peyton Wilson out of NC State. He's almost 6'4", 233 pounds with extremely short arms. His arm length is 4th percentile, which is pretty unfortunate, but he ran a 4.33 in the 40-yard dash, which is 98th percentile. He had a 91st percentile three cone. Outside of arm length, he is an elite athlete, and you definitely see that show up on tape. He's just got blazing speed. He patrols sideline to sideline. He's got multiple plays where he's chasing down runs 50 yards down the field from the backside. I think overall, he pretty clearly has the best college tape of any linebacker in this class. He led all Power 5 defensive players with 67 stops last year, which is a tackle that results in an unsuccessful play for the offense. He has really quick play recognition. He consistently beats pullers to their aiming point. For the most part, he's a secure and reliable tackler, another player with a sub 5% missed tackle rate. For the issues I have with Peyton Wilson as a run defender, it starts with the arm length and just an inability to really play off of blocks. I thought in the Virginia game, he showed some decent block shedding ability, but outside of that, you don't really see him stack and shed that often, and I'm not sure he's really going to be able to hold up at the point of attack in the NFL. Being tall and thin also kind of limits his contact balance and his ability to anchor. The few times he did miss tackles, it was because he left his feet and tackled high, but overall that wasn't a major issue. And then there were also a few times he got fooled by misdirection, but overall I think his play recognition was pretty solid. He's got outstanding coverage range. He just springs into zone drops. He gets depth so quickly. He has really good eye balance. He's able to read the quarterback's eyes, but anticipate routes that are developing behind him. And he played really all over the field for NC State's defense. He would play in the slot, he'd play on the edge, he'd play a traditional linebacker role. He had 6 sacks, and he showed some skills as a pass rusher. With under 31-inch arms, I'm not sure he really has much upside to do that in the NFL, but as a traditional blitzer, I think he can definitely be effective. And then the main thing that's limiting Peyton Wilson's grade is his injury history. He would still be my linebacker 2 if he was fully healthy, but he'd be ranked higher overall. He had an ACL tear in 2017, re-injured that knee in 2018. He had surgery on both shoulders after the 2020 season, and then he missed most of 2021 after he got a shoulder dislocation. So without firsthand insight into people's medical situations, all I can really do is try to assess risk from the outside. And I've had Peyton Wilson around 38 to 40 on my board for most of the process. That's how I view him, purely based on the tape grade, but with his injury history at 24 years old, I felt like moving him down to 56th made sense. And my top ranked linebacker is Edgerrin Cooper out of Texas A&M. He comes in at 35th on my overall big board. He's the classic high upside, low floor linebacker prospect. 6'2", 230 with 34-inch arms. He ran a 4.51 in the 40-yard dash. Didn't have as good of a vertical and broad jump as I expected based on how explosive he is on tape, but I'm trusting the film with Edgerrin Cooper. This dude is explosive as hell. He has almost everything you look for in terms of movement skills. He has elite chase down speed. He hardly ever loses the edge to outside runs. They used him a lot as a spy, and he was able to easily track down Jaden Daniels, Jalen Milroe. Like, watch his sacks on Jaden Daniels. There was no one in the SEC that was able to keep up with him like that. I think what's most impressive is his first step explosiveness. He had a couple reps where he was getting into his zone drop and they ran a halfback draw, and he was able to just plant that back foot and reach top speed in the blink of an eye, close in on the ball carrier. He's able to scrape laterally with square pads and move as quickly as some of these linebackers can with their hips open, running full speed. He does have a slender frame and doesn't really have the lower half strength to anchor if he doesn't establish early contact, but he has sophisticated hand usage when it comes to playing off of blocks and maneuvering through traffic. His length makes him a reliable wrap-up tackler, but he does have major issues breaking down in open space. For me, that's the thing that's keeping Edgerrin Cooper from having a first-round grade, is his stiffness changing directions as a tackler. I think his ability to change directions and adjust his pursuit angle is his one real limitation in run defense. In coverage, he showed flashes. He definitely has the speed to carry seam routes in Tampa 2. I had to go through so many games to find actual examples of that, but there are isolated reps of him keeping up with tight ends step for step, and he's the best linebacker in this class at recognizing screens, triggering downhill, blowing up the play. He had a stop on a screen pass against South Carolina that's probably on his highlights somewhere that I think was his best play on tape all season. But for the most part, he had a very very elementary coverage role in Texas A&M's defense. He wasn't asked to play man coverage. He didn't really have complex responsibilities when he was spot dropping in zone. For the most part, he was just a spy defender that was hovering 3 to 5 yards off the line of scrimmage. When the quarterback breaks the pocket, he just immediately closes in on them and gets a sack. He led FBS linebackers with 10 sacks this past season. His instincts, awareness, and coverage IQ is a complete unknown, and it's another thing, along with the stiffness and open space, that's keeping him from having a first-round grade. But I think Edgerrin Cooper has the highest upside of any linebacker in this class. I feel pretty confident with him as linebacker 1. As far as whether or not I would draft him at 35th overall, I'm not sure. It's a pretty weird dynamic with linebackers in the draft because I'm trying to project how good I think they're going to end up for their career. But a lot of times with linebackers, their breakout ends up happening in their 4th year. So you have to survive through 3 to 4 years of below average linebacker play, and then they hit free agency and some other team pays them once they're actually good. So I think the boom bust linebacker archetype hasn't shown to be the best investment early in the draft, but just isolating Edgerrin Cooper as a player, I think to me, he's clearly the best linebacker this year. These are the players I haven't watched. I'm a few games into Aaron Casey out of Indiana, who I didn't talk about. By the time I post this video, I'll probably have a grade for him, which will be up on the screen. Outside of that, I don't see myself getting into any of these other players, but if there's anyone that has stood out to you, feel free to leave those in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, let me know in the comments any NFL draft prospects that you'd like me to cover. And if you want to see my full draft board as an interactive filterable table, I've got that up at A to Z sports.com. The link to that is in the description.